What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, Nick, we have the repeat coming up this month. Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev. It's only a few weeks away, if you can believe it. I'm really looking forward to this fight, and I do think it can be a little bit different this time, but I want to talk today specifically about the things that Charles Oliveira needs to do in order for there to be a different outcome the second time around. And the first thing that comes to mind to me is he needs to have a bit of a different approach with his grappling. You know, I believe personally that Charles can submit 99% of the UFC lightweights from his back, from the guard position. Unfortunately, Islam Makhachev happens to be in that 1% that he is not able to submit. Charles has one of the best guards in the game, but Islam is just not getting submitted from the top position. So I think he needs to revisit how he handles the grappling exchanges. I think he needs to look to do a lot more top pressure grappling. He needs to wrestle up if he does end up on his back. And then the other point is I think he needs to slow down a little bit. When he comes guns a-blazing at Islam, he gives Islam the momentum that he needs to change levels and just secure that takedown. So I think there's a few more things that we can get into, but those are kind of just off the top of my head, the two things that Charles really needs to revise in order to get a different outcome.
Yeah, and those 2 points stick out to me as well. Everybody knows that Charles Oliveira is an exciting fighter. We've said it on here probably a dozen times. If it weren't for Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier being in his same division, I'll throw Michael Chandler in there too, he would be considered the most exciting fighter at lightweight, maybe the most exciting fighter in the UFC, and he's been that way for years. So while I'm nobody to tell him he should switch up his game or anything like that, we did just see this fight take place not that long ago, and we kind of know how it ended. And I feel like Charles Oliveira actually has a better game plan to go into the second match after feeling Islam. I know that Islam Makhachev is such a powerhouse when it comes to the fight on the ground, and he can get it there through body locks. He can get it there when it's up against the cage. He can get it there from straight ones and twos that he shoots from open range. But what you need to focus on with Charles Oliveira is not fighting from your back, doing that as a last resort. I feel like so many people put stock into Charles Oliveira's grappling game from the bottom that he almost started to believe it. And he's like, I have submitted countless people from my back in the UFC. Maybe I can do it from here too. And once you have that in your mind, fighting a guy like Islam, fighting a guy like Khabib is just not going to work out for you because they don't get submitted from the bottom. That just is something that doesn't happen to that level of a fighter from that part of the world that does that style of fighting. They're too good. They're too disciplined in their attacks. They're too lethal with their striking.
Posture's always perfect.
Posture, yeah, that's another thing. So perfect, and they game plan for that. They know Charles is dangerous there. They're not going to get submitted. You're not going to happen to submit them from down there. So while I agree that Charles Oliveira is one of the best fighters from his back in the UFC, and that's almost like a rare thing to see these days because everybody's so good everywhere, but he's still able to do it to most. He's not going to be able to do it to Islam, and that's why I think it'd be really smart for him to slow the pace down, just like you said, when it comes to the striking realm, and not go guns a-blazing and wind up on your back earlier in a round than you'd want to be there. I think that Charles Oliveira has great striking. He clearly has the striking edge over Islam, but when he goes in there and gets into a firefight with Islam, then it comes closer to a 50-50 and anybody can crack anybody. Anybody can sit down anybody in 4-ounce gloves. So I think Charles Oliveira should really be more precise, be more patient, and keep range a little bit longer on the feet and in the striking realm as these rounds go on, because obviously you're going to wind up on your back at some point when you fight Islam Makhachev. But if you can extend that period where you're on the feet for a little bit longer, maybe take half of the round where you're only striking with somebody and being precise and trying to outstrike them and outpoint them from the outside, you can find yourself in a great position where they feel like they're fighting from behind to steal the rest of that round. And that's where you can find some mistakes, where you can find some overextensions on limbs and things like that out of an Islam Makhachev or a fighter of that caliber and that style, where you could actually submit them from your back if and when they do take you to the ground.
Yeah, and I think that's the name of the game is slowing things down, slowing the pace down, because Islam Makhachev is not even the type of grappler that likes to just change levels and shoot a double leg.
Right.
But Charles, if you come straight forward at Islam, the way that Charles he's a marauder. He just kind of comes straight forward, bites down on his mouthpiece, and is ready to bang. And that's fun. That's exciting. I love to see it as much as anybody, and he's won a lot of fights that way.
Right.
But if you give Islam that forward momentum, he's going to change levels and just shoot a double leg on you. He can do that with his eyes closed. It's very easy for him to do that technique he has in his back pocket and can use it at any time. But if Charles starts to circle around a little bit, work his jab, find his range, I think he's just as skilled on the feet as Islam is. They can kind of go tit for tat. And as you said, he needs to kind of pepper in some jabs. And then when the grappling exchanges do happen, he needs to be smart and disciplined about how he handles them. I will not sit here and tell you that I think Alexander Volkanovski is a better grappler than Charles Oliveira, but I will for sure sit here and tell you that Alexander Volkanovski had a way better game plan when it came to how to handle the grappling exchanges with Islam. One, Volk did a very good job of avoiding a lot of those because he had a good striking game plan. But then two, when they did happen, Volk was very disciplined about working his reversals. We even saw him get a reversal on Islam Makhachev, which nobody does that. Who reverses a takedown attempt from Islam Makhachev? Well, Volk does. And then when he did get on his back, he abandoned all attacks and worked defense, worked to get himself back to his feet with expending the least amount of energy possible, which is exactly what Charles needs to do. He needs to create some scrambles. He needs to wrestle up. You know, Charles has got really good guillotines. He's got really good Darce chokes. If he can find, sometimes in a scramble, that's where you find stuff you wouldn't normally find against a very disciplined fighter. If he can create one of those crazy scrambles, maybe he can snatch Islam's neck. Maybe he can make something interesting happen. But just being content from the guard position, while that served him well in the UFC, and not many people can be successful inside of a cage from the guard position like Charles has, it's not going to make him successful against Islam Makhachev. Islam, I believe, you're unable to submit him from the guard. You're not going to throw a triangle on him. You're not going to accidentally catch him in an arm bar. You're not going to roll underneath him and get a knee bar on him or something like that. That's just, he's too disciplined in his position. He absolutely will sit right there in the half guard if he has to. He's not going to try to advance until he feels like he's able to advance and get a submission just like he did last time. He waited until he saw the opportunity for the head and arm, and that was when he did that knee cut and got the sub. So Charles, I'm saying all that to basically say Charles needs to grapple, but he needs to try to grapple from the top position and not be content and complacent from the bottom.
Yeah, and Charles Oliveira is a very unorthodox, very unusual, and creative striker. So he needs to use that to his advantage. Like we said, it's best if he can stay nice and calm and dictate the pace of the fight when it comes to the striking realm. But every now and again, press that gas and throw up one of those jumping knees that you like to do and spin elbows and all the crazy stuff that makes Charles Oliveira who he is. I'm all game for that, but you have to pepper those in at the right time. If you just go out as soon as the ref says go and start doing that, eventually you're going to wind up, chest to chest with Islam Makhachev, and that's when you wind up on the ground with 4 minutes left in the first round. That's just not where you want to be. And I'm so glad you brought Volkanovski into the conversation because, of course, there's so much we can all learn and take from Volkanovski. He's the best fighter, pound for pound. I've got him at number one right now, especially after how good he looked against Islam. But if you're fighting Islam Makhachev, you better go back and study exactly what Volkanovski did because he looked so good in there. And I truly think what separated him from Charles Oliveira as far as their fights against Islam Makhachev is the scramble ability, is the absolute sense of urgency that Volk had when Islam, shot him for those takedowns, when he did close the distance, when he did try to take it to the ground. Volkanovski was having no part of it, and that's why he created those great scrambles, those reversals, and sometimes he even found some creative striking on the breakaway. As he's getting away from Islam, he's finally, built up a frame against his chest, or, he's got something safe, and then he can throw something interesting right there. Charles Oliveira can do all that same stuff that Volk can do, and he might even be better at doing that creative, weird, breakaway striking stuff than Volk is. But if he doesn't try to utilize that stuff and make it dirty, make it an MMA fight, then he's not going to get his hand raised in this one. Volkanovski did everything he could to truly mix the martial arts in every sense of the way. When they're striking, he's throwing in, almost like level changes on Islam Makhachev just to give him something to think about. And then when Islam shoots in on him, he's scrambling. Like the Hickman brothers have probably drilled so much great wrestling and scramble ability into Volkanovski that it's second nature to him now. I know Charles Oliveira can do all the same things, and that's why if he can go out there and truly mix the martial arts. Don't just stand and kickbox with him and then when it goes to the ground, do jiu-jitsu with him. Mix the martial arts through and through, get nasty, make it an ugly fight. And I think if he can get creative in those strange moments of the fight when it's on the feet, I think he could shock the world and maybe get his hand raised against Islam. I'm not going to put all my stock into Charles winning this one yet, but Islam is going to have a tough fight on his hand, to say the least.
Agreed.